Sugar is a sneaky ingredient and our worldwide consumption of it keeps going up and up. It's been a controversial topic, but are all sugars as bad as we make them out to be? Are some of them okay? Which kinds? How much? And what about sweeteners like stevia? We're gonna cover a lot of ground today, including 10 ways that we can manage our sugar intake, but as usual, I'm gonna try to keep this as brief and as uncomplicated as possible, but we did write an article about it on the blog. It goes into a lot more detail. If you wanna learn more, link is in description, but for now, let's dive in. Sugar is a type of carbohydrate and it can be found in a lot of different kinds of foods. It's most concentrated in forms like white sugar, which has been extracted from a plant and refined into a crystalline substance. But regardless of where it comes from, once we eat it, our bodies turn it into glucose, which is ultimately used for energy. Glucose is actually our brain and muscles' primary and preferred fuel source. So if our bodies need it to function optimally, then why does sugar have such a bad rap? Sugars can be extracted from two different categories of carbohydrates. The first one is called complex carbs, and these are usually the ones that are found naturally in foods. The other is called simple carbs, and these are usually the sugars that are added to foods. Simple carbs you'll find in things like sweetened coffee drinks, energy drinks, colas, fruit juices, store-bought cereals, and candies. These simple carbs cause a rapid spike in blood sugar levels, followed by a rapid drop, and that's why sometimes we can crash and feel tired after we've eaten something especially sweet. But aside from fatigue, there's potential long-term consequences of excess sugar intake. It can be taxing to the pancreas. It can cause excess weight gain, which can increase the risk of things like diabetes and high blood pressure and so on. But what about the sugars that are naturally found in some foods? These are things like whole grains and legumes and vegetables. These complex carbs, as the name would suggest, they have a more complex structure, which means it takes longer for the body to break it down. That means the body processes and digests the sugars a lot more slowly, and that's a good thing. It leaves our bodies with a lasting energy supply. It's not so taxing on the pancreas. They're nutrient dense. They give our brain and our muscles its preferred energy source, and the fiber helps to keep us fuller for longer. I get asked about fruit all the time, and I think because people know that there's sugar in it, they feel the need to avoid it sometimes. And it's true that fruits do contain simple carbs, but they also contain complex carbs, and that complicates things a little bit. But see, the main thing that fruits have, that fruit juices, for example, don't have, is fiber, and that is the magic component. The fiber itself helps the body slow down our absorption of sugars. Not to mention that fruits have a whole slew of powerful nutrients, and there's just so many benefits to eating them. But what about something like smoothies? Smoothies keep the fiber intact. You're just adding the whole fruit to a blender. But sometimes some smoothies can have a lot of fruits in them, maybe a banana and a mango and an orange and maybe some others as well. One thing we can do to offset it is to add more fiber. We've talked about that one. But proteins and fats also help our bodies slow sugar absorption. So for example, you might add some spinach for some extra fiber, some nut butter for some extra fat, and some soy yogurt or soy milk for some extra protein. Now what about coconut sugar or maple syrup or agave syrup? These are more natural than the processed white sugars, so they must be better, right? But our bodies actually break them down and use them in much the same way. They're still in extracted form, and they're still considered simple carbs. Now, we still use these sweeteners in our recipes for its flavor sometimes, but we try to use them in moderation. And when we can, we substitute it for some other ingredients. I'll share what those are with you in just a minute. Now, what about sugar substitutes like stevia or other artificial sweeteners? It's a controversial and hot topic, and we've delved into it in a lot more detail in that article on the blog. Again, link in description to learn more. Essentially, these artificial sweeteners are usually 0 calorie, which is why a lot of people opt for them. It doesn't cause the blood sugar spike we talked about before, so no harm, right? And the most recent meta-analysis says they haven't been linked to health outcomes like diabetes, kidney disease, or high blood pressure either. But some studies point out some other issues. For example, artificial sweeteners might trick the brain. Consuming them lights up similar regions in the brain in terms of satisfaction as it does when we eat sugar. So artificial sweeteners might not actually help us to curb sugar cravings because our minds are still craving that something sweet. Bottom line, there's a lot of controversy on the topic, and here at Pickup Limes, we recommend whole food sources over processed foods whenever possible, and this includes added sugars and artificial sweeteners. Now we're gonna delve into our top 10 tips on how to manage sugar intake. Number 1, for most recipes, we can decrease the amount of sugar by at least a quarter without any noticeable difference in taste or texture. And number 2, when we can, we use whole foods to sweeten things up. For example, using a mashed banana in a pancake recipe in place of sugar, or some applesauce to replace the syrup in some baked goods like our banana bread. We use unsweetened plant milk in our smoothies and let the fruits naturally sweeten it instead. And the same goes for our oatmeal, using some fruits as a natural sweetener in place of syrup. Number 3, we like to use spices whenever possible, things like cinnamon or pumpkin pie spice or pure extracts like vanilla or almond or lemon extract to help give flavor without the need for extra sweeteners. And number 4, a sugar craving can also be mistaken for thirst. So if you're craving a sweet beverage, try drinking a glass of water first. Number 5, if water just doesn't cut it because maybe you're used to the juices or sodas or energy drinks, try flavoring the water instead. I like to add some fresh fruit or cucumbers, or herbs are really good like mint or basil. And if I'm gonna have 100% fruit juice, I try to dilute it if I can with some carbonated water, which makes me feel like I'm drinking some kind of cola. And if I'm out buying a flavored coffee or tea drink, I just request it half or a quarter sweet, which means they use fewer pumps of syrup. And number 6, try purchasing unsweetened plant milks and plant yogurts whenever you can. And if you want to drizzle on some syrup, at least you get to decide how much goes in it. Number 7, if you're craving something sweet after dinner, try to include some type of fruit in the mix. We like to go for some fruit that was dipped in almond butter. Maybe we melt it together with a bit of pure dark chocolate, or you can try baking some apples that were sprinkled with some cinnamon and serve it with a side of unsweetened plant yogurt. Or my summertime favorite is just snacking on some frozen grapes. Number 8, condiments can have a surprisingly high amount of sugar added to them. So whenever you can, make your own salad dressings or jams or spreads so that you can control the sugar. You can try our 2-ingredient jam recipe, or our delicious chocolate spread, or our salad dressings. I'll leave the links for you below. Number 9, I can't emphasize the importance of reading labels. Sugar is added to a whole bunch of foods you might not expect it in, and manufacturers can be sneaky and call sugar by its many different names. Evaporated cane juice, caramel, molasses, dextrin, and all the words ending in ose like lactose, maltose, dextrose, and sucrose. So try scanning the ingredient list before you make a purchase, and if you see sugar within the first few ingredients on the list, try seeing if there's any substitutes available instead. For example, Robin recently asked me to pick up some cornflakes for him when I was at the store. One of them had sugar in it as a second ingredient, and one had no sugar in it at all. Reading labels just helps us to make more conscious decisions. And finally, number 10, when you've noticed that you've decreased the amount of sugar in your diet and you've substituted it for homemade versions or more whole food options, you might even start to notice that those intense sugar cravings gradually disappear. We retrain our taste buds to appreciate the natural sweetness of foods, and you might be surprised to see you don't even desire highly sweetened foods after a while. At Pickup Limes, we don't like to label foods as good or bad. We prefer to label them as more often and less often. So if I can take a quick second to recap, not all sugars are as bad as we make them out to be. Those that are naturally found in foods are those that we want to enjoy more often, sources like fruits and whole grains and veggies. Processed sugars, sweeteners, artificial or otherwise, are the ones we want to try to consume less often. And when you need to use added sugars, try a homemade recipe whenever you can. That way you control how much goes in it. And also try to read labels, because sugars can be disguised as many different things. I really hope that you found today's video helpful and that it shared some insight into the complicated world that is sugar. And I want to emphasize that the information I've shared today is information I learned when I was studying about this stuff in university, but everybody also has a different relationship with sugar, and they know best, you know best what works for your body. So don't take my answer as the be all end all. Always do your own research, do what feels good to you. And if you have any tips of your own on how to manage sugar intake, you can share it in the comments. I'll see you guys down there. If you enjoyed today's video, it always means a lot when you give it a thumbs up, shows a lot of support. And that's it. Pickup Limes signing off. We'll see you in the next video. Now what about sugar substitutes like stevia? Now what about sugar substitutes? Now what about sugar sweeteners? Now what about, but essentially these artificial sweeteners are 0 calorie, which is why, oh my gosh. But some studies,